Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. So, first of all, let me start by thanking you for setting some time apart amidst your busy schedule and joining this webinar session. It means a lot to us. So, we conduct, free webinars and workshops for our users and also the new entries to our Active Directory suite of products on a regular basis so that we share information, we share valuable information. It's more than a product pitch. We're not trying to sell stuff here, but more than that, we are trying to make lives of administrators and help desk technicians and whoever is involved with Active Directory. We are trying to make the lives of all those technicians a lot more easier. So that's the whole idea of these webinars and workshops. So this is another webinar that we have conducted, and thank you very much for joining this session once again. So let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Vivin Satyan, and I work as a technical consultant in the Active Directory team of ManageEngine. Now, I have been with ManageEngine for over 5 years now, and as a technical consultant, I have the opportunity of interacting with administrators from various organizations. And I also deploy Active Directory applications in various organizations, be it a scale of a 100-employee organization or a 10,000 employee organization. I've had the opportunity of deploying Active Directory applications. And during that process, I've also had I also get to know the challenges that admins face on a regular basis when it comes to managing Active Directory or administering Active Directory. So with that little bit of experience in hand, I have created this presentation. And over the next 45 minutes, I'm going to discuss with you the 4 crucial aspects of Active Directory administration. All right, let's get started. So the agenda for the next 45 minutes is I will be starting off by discussing some of the routine tasks that administrators have to perform when it comes to Active Directory management. And next, I have actually categorized all those routine tasks into 4 categories. And according to me, there are 4 aspects of Active Directory management. And we'll also be discussing about the options that we have in hand when it comes to managing or administering Active Directory. So when I say options, we will definitely have to be discussing about the tools that Microsoft has given us to manage Active Directory. And I'm going to just share with you some of the limitations or challenges that we have when it comes with the native tools, right? And I'm going to suggest a better alternative, and I'm going to leave it up to you to see whether the alternative that I suggest is a good fit for you or not. And the last, we'll open the stage for question and answers. And we have a tech team back here who will be answering your questions. And we love questions, be it any question related to Active Directory, managing Active Directory, or delegating Active Directory, anything. Just shoot it out to us, and we'd be more than happy to get back to you with the right answers to the best of our abilities. All right. Now, let's start with something very basic here. Now, when I say Active Directory is all about a central repository of objects. And when I say objects, I'm referring to users, computers, groups, contacts, and other resources in your Active Directory infrastructure. So the whole idea, or the core idea, or the fundamental idea behind this technology is centralized administration, which was missing in something called Workgroup. So people wanted centralized administration, and that's when Microsoft came up with this wonderful technology called Active Directory. And Active Directory, when I say Active Directory from a general standpoint, there are 2 core functions to Active Directory. The first one will be authenticating, and the second one is going to be authorizing users. So when a security principal needs access to a resource in your organization, or in other words, your Active Directory infrastructure, the first phase will be authenticating, which is going to validate the credentials, and the next step will be authorization. So it is in the authorization stage that you decide whether a specific user is supposed to be accessing a resource or not. So all those restrictions will be in place in the second phase, which is the authorization phase. So this is the general standpoint of Active Directory. from a layman's perspective. Now, from an admin standpoint, Active Directory means something else. It is just not about authenticating and authorizing users. Yes, of course, that's part of Active Directory. But when it comes to administrators, there are different things and different meanings to Active Directory management. So I have listed here some of the key responsibilities that administrators have when it comes to managing Active Directory infrastructure. This first one will be account management. Let's start with a very basic. So I'm talking about managing the life cycle of objects within Active Directory. And what do I mean by life cycle is you start with creating an object in Active Directory, and then you manage the object, and you delete the object in Active Directory. And if it's an accidental deletion, you'll have to have a backup plan to restore the object. So this is what I mean, or I refer to as the life cycle of an object, right? Creation, modification, deletion, and restoration if that is needed. And the second responsibility that an administrator has is delegating management actions to other users in your Active Directory infrastructure, because we all know that Active Directory is no longer limited just to administrators. So you have your help desk technicians, you have the HR who's now a part of your Active Directory infrastructure, and they have different roles to perform based on their skill set. For instance, you have your help desk technician resetting password for other users in your organization and unlocking any locked out accounts. And you have the HR now initiating the user provisioning process, right? So it's one of the responsibilities of the administrator to delegate, and not only delegate, at the same time, the administrator has to review the actions, right? The third responsibility would be to maintain the security and integrity of objects. Now, what do I mean by this? So an admin has to define security policies or restrictions in such a manner that the policies help the administrator strike a balance between users' productivity and the security of the organization. For example, an administrator needs to define security settings for his or her organization in such a manner that it does not affect the productivity of the users. Users should get access to resources whenever it's appropriate. So you cannot compromise the productivity of the users just to tighten up security. So striking the right balance is one of the responsibility of the administrator. And then processing requests. So be it a request to access a specific resource in the organization, or be it a request from the HR or the help desk technician to delete a user account or disable a user account. So you'll have to, the admin has to process all sorts of requests that are raised by the other users in the Active Directory infrastructure. Last but not the least, Active Directory housekeeping stuff and also data cleanup. Now, all these are some of the core responsibilities any administrator would have. Of course, you do have additional responsibilities, but on a broader perspective, these are the major responsibilities of an administrator. Now, what I've done here is I have categorized all those responsibilities into 4 different aspects. So the first one will be retrieving information. Now, this becomes very crucial because an administrator needs to know what's going on in Active Directory. Let's say you'd like to know if there are any computers in your Active Directory infrastructure that are not used for more than 180 days, or let's say 365 days. So that's part of Active Directory cleanup. So retrieving information about users, computers, groups, contacts from a security standpoint or from a data collection standpoint is going to be crucial. And then comes managing objects. So we have 2 ways of managing objects. You can do things the manual way, but people prefer to automate some of the crucial stuff, some of the routine stuff that they perform. For instance, let's talk about user creation. So I know that administrators would love to automate this process of user creation or user provisioning whenever it's going to be a bulk process. So if you are recruiting employees in bulk, let's say 10 employees or 20 employees in a month or 30 employees in a month. So there arises a need to automate some of those routine tasks. So, and then comes the obvious, which is the admin has to delegate and audit actions, certain management actions, and also Active Directory cleanup. So we are going to be discussing about all these four aspects and how to perform these four actions the Microsoft way, and I'm going to show you a better way of performing all these four things. All right, so let's get started here. So what are the options that we have in hand for managing Active Directory? So we can manage Active Directory using the native tools, or you can maybe use a third-party tool to manage Active Directory based on your convenience, right? Now, what do I mean by native tools? So these are some of the tools that I was referring to as the native tools. So for instance, you have PowerShell, you have the Active Directory Users and Computers console, and if you have Office 365 in your organization, you have the Admin Center, and then you have the Skype for Business, Exchange Management Console, and Event Viewer for tracking any specific security events, right? So you have all these, and this is what I was referring to as when I say native tools. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to belittle the native tools that Microsoft has given us. I'm just trying to say that I'm just trying to share with you some of the challenges that you might face when it comes to managing Active Directory with these native tools. So let me quickly go to my test setup to show you something here. Okay, let's talk about a very standard process, right? And the standard process here is now let's say I'm trying to use one of those native tools, which is PowerShell, and I'm trying to create user accounts in Active Directory. Let's assume. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm trying to get a sample script for user provisioning. So let's look for a sample script, and I'm going to ask some help from Microsoft. Okay, so I'm trying to get some help from Microsoft to create new Active Directory accounts. All right, and I use a commandlet that's going to help me with the sample script, and there you go. So I have a sample script in front of me that's going to help me create new accounts in Active Directory. Now, this sample script needs to be tweaked based on your requirement, and then you can execute the script. This is one way of doing stuff using the native tools. But the problem with this native tools is I have some challenges right here for you that I'd like to share with you when it comes to native tools. The first challenge that I find with the native tools is the confirmation messages that you get. Let's say you execute a script for creating user accounts. You're trying to create 10 user accounts in Active Directory using PowerShell scripts. 8 user accounts were created successfully, 2 user accounts failed. So the messages that you get for the failures aren't very helpful. So you do not know the exact reason for failure. Is it because of the password policy requirement, or is it because of a space in the SAM account name, or is it because of the character restriction of any other attribute? Or so it's going to be quite complex for you to understand the reason for the failure from the messages that you get when it comes to PowerShell. And let's say I was talking about some of the native tools here. Right, so you have the Office 365 Admin Center, Skype for Business, the Exchange Management Console, and Event Viewer. So if you are trying to generate reports, or if you're trying to get information out from Active Directory, so you will have to consolidate information from multiple native tools in order to get the right information. And then ability to delegate the same to non-admin users, because the learning curve involved in actually understanding this is something that you cannot overlook. So this might be very simple for an administrator, or even for some of the helpless technicians. But if you're trying to delegate some of these actions to non-IT users, which is becoming a common thing nowadays, it's going to be a bit of a task for them to understand the technology and the tool that you are going to delegate to them. And of course, it's going to be a bit time consuming because you'll have to toggle between multiple windows to get some simple stuff done in Active Directory. So, what is the better alternative that I'm going to suggest to you? Now, please, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to belittle PowerShell here, or belittle any of the native tools. All of them do a great job. But what I'm trying to say is, when you have another alternative that's going to actually facilitate the process in a much easier manner, why not have a look at the tool, right? So that's exactly what I'm going to do in the next 30 minutes from here. So I'm going to share some of the, I've already shared the 4 aspects of Active Directory management, and I'm going to show you how this specific tool is going to ease the process of an administrator, of a help desk technician, of the HR when it comes to managing Active Directory. All right, the first aspect, retrieving information from Active Directory using a third-party tool, something like AD Manager Plus, right? So the first scenario that I'm going to discuss with you is, you might have this basic question. It's a very important security principle that the number of administrators that you have in your organization should always be controlled, in the sense you should always be knowing how many administrators you have in your organization. And how do you look up whether a specific user has admin rights or not is, you have an easier way of doing it. And the easier way is, you just open up the Active Directory users and computers console, and you double click the user's property, and you have the member of tab right here. Right? So the member of tab gives you the group membership of a specific user, and you try to look at the group membership of this user to see whether this user is a part of any top level security groups in your domain. Now, in our example here, I'm just trying to find out whether this user has admin rights. I just verify the group membership of this user. All these groups look to me as though they are very basic groups. Now, a very important point that is missing in this specific console is, this console gives me the information about the direct groups that are related to this help desk technician. Once again, this console gives me only the direct groups that are listed or that are linked to this specific technician. But what is the missing piece? I'll show you what is the missing piece. I'm going to inspect the group membership of these groups to give you the answer. All right. So I try to inspect the group membership of those groups. I go to the member of tab, everything looks good. I open up another group. I go to the member of tab, everything looks good. I open up another group and I go to the member of tab. There you go. Now, what does this mean to you is, even though the user that we have discussed about, let's say you open up a user's property and you go to the member of tab, so you see some groups listed here. These are the direct groups that are related to the user. But there's another concept called as nested group membership. Who knows? This specific security group might be linked in a nested manner to a top level security group in your domain, just as we saw in this specific example. Here, the account provisioning group is a basic group in Active Directory, whereas the account provisioning group is linked to the domain admins. Now, what happens here is, this specific group now has domain admin privileges, and the users who are part of this specific group now have admin rights, not directly, but through nested group membership. So the point that I'm trying to drive is, whenever you're trying to check for the group membership of a specific user account in Active Directory, it's very important you investigate the nested group membership as well. So this is a tool, a third-party tool, which is AD Manager Plus, and I'm going to quickly perform the same search query here. I'm going to find out the groups for a specific user, not only the direct groups, but also the nested groups. I go to groups for users, I hit select, I search the technician. Instead of opening up the Active Directory users and computers, I search for this specific technician. I have the technician right here. Hit OK and then generate. Now when I generate, according to the Microsoft console, I should be getting 4 groups. But here I get a list of 8 groups that are related to the same technician, and which means the domain admins, which was nested for this specific user in terms of group membership, is also taken into consideration when it comes to group membership. So this is how you get to understand the exact group membership of your user account. And this is how you find out whether there are any normal or basic user accounts in Active Directory with elevated admin rights, right? And what can you do with this list? You simply select the checkbox and then probably remove all those groups from being part of this specific technician. So this is not just about retrieving information from Active Directory, it also allows you to act on the information that you have gathered from Active Directory. All right, so this is the first piece of information that I wanted to share with you, investigating nested group membership. Okay, and next one is something related to shared folders, right? So at least 10% of an information's or an organization's data is stored in a shared folder in some form or the other, right? You have it stored in the form of a text file or a PDF file or an Excel sheet. So all that can be user critical data or business critical data stored on shared folders. And when you have shared folders in your organization, it is very important that those shared folders are accessible only by the appropriate users or groups. So one other responsibility of an administrator now is to see whether the permissions are in place, and this check has to happen on a regular basis, at least let's say once in every month. So I have one such confidential folder right here, okay, and I have some business critical information and user critical information here. So I'm going to perform a periodic check. So the name of the folder is corp data, and according to me, this corp data should be accessible only by the finance managers group. So I do a right click, properties, I go to security, hoping that only the finance managers are on the list. Just because I'm not the only administrator in this organization, someone has modified the permission list here. So this is something that is going to be quite alarming for any administrator. Now, the everyone group has access over corp data. That's not good news. And if I just scroll down, I have few other users and groups who have access to this specific folder. And in order for me to know what level of access do they have, I need to select the individual user and then go through the list in order to find out what level of access do they have. And the problem gets even worse when this specific folder has multiple subfolders within, right? So finding out, or in other words, analyzing and then fixing inappropriate permissions, it's not going to be an easy task when it comes to this specific console. So how do you analyze and fix inappropriate permissions in an effective manner? Again, we get the help of this specific application, AD Manager Plus. Step 1, find out the permissions on a specific confidential shared folder. I go to NTFS reports because we are talking about shared folder permissions here. And I have something called permission for folders. That's the exact query that I'd like to target. And I'm trying to have a look at a specific folder that's inside of my file server. So I go to that specific file server and then I look for a folder which is corp data. There you go. Okay. I hit OK. And corp data, since this folder has multiple subfolders within, I'd like to get the permissions of all those subfolders as well. Let's say I have 50 subfolders within the corp data folder. I hit generate. In my example, I just had 3 folders, so it shouldn't take much time. And now this report is trying to get the list of all the permissions, not only on the parent folder, but also on the subfolders, and it's done. So I have the list of permissions here. So I see that Aaron has access to this folder, and I see the domain admins. And what's even more strange is every one group has access to corp data, and I definitely don't want this to be the scenario in one of your offices, right? Now, I'd like to find out what level of access do these specific users or groups have over corp data. Is it just the basic rights, or do they have access to the subfolders as well? So I go to advanced, and I get the information here. Parent folder, subfolders as well. What level of access? Oh, full control. And is it just for this specific folder, or folders within them applies to subfolders as well? And is inheritance set to true or false? For some it is false, and for a few others it's true. Now that I know how many users and groups have access to this and what level of access do all those users have, it's time for me to fix this problem. I'm going to now make sure that only the finance managers have access to corp data, and no one else in my organization should have access to this piece of information. Step 2, I go to File Server Management. We are trying to modify NTFS permission. We first analyzed NTFS permission, and then we are going to modify NTFS permission. All right? I select the same server, same folder, hit OK, and I want the finance managers group to have access to this specific folder. Okay, finance managers, I hit OK. And what level of access should they be having? I just want them to have, let's say, read and write. Okay, I hit done. And they should have access to not only that specific folder, but also the subfolders and files. And it's obviously going to be an allow and not a deny permission, because I've already defined the permissions here. Okay, to make things even more simple, let's say you already have a folder structure in place with the exact permissions that you want. You can even copy permissions from that folder. It makes your job a lot more easier. Now, once you have defined who should have access over corp data, in our case, finance manager should have access over corp data. Now, how are you going to wipe out the other users who already have access to this piece of information? Let's assume you have 200 objects having access to corp data. How are you going to remove all those 200 objects from that permission list? It's going to be a hectic task if you decide to do it one by one. This checkbox here does the trick for you. Remove all existing permissions on corp data and apply only the ones that are defined above. The minute you hit modify, oh, you'd like to have a preview, you have the preview right here. And then you hit modify. So this way you have analyzed and then fixed inappropriate permissions on confidential data. All right. Now, so one fine day you'd like to get the list of all users in your Active Directory infrastructure, and you'd like to know some information about those users in your organization. So if you are writing a PowerShell script and trying to add 50 attributes, 50 user attributes to that script, PowerShell is going to give you all those information, but the challenge that we have with PowerShell and retrieving information from Active Directory is PowerShell is very good at querying information from Active Directory, but it does not do a good job when it comes to formatting information. I have been repeating this for over 5 years now. Right from the day I started using this tool, I've whenever I get a chance, I use this statement because that's very true. It does a very good job at retrieving information, but not so good at formatting information. So, querying information about users. And how easy is that? So for querying information, I have a separate category here. I go to all users, I hit generate, and this is now giving me the list of all the users in my Active Directory infrastructure. And if I'd like to target any specific organizational unit, yes, I have an option to do that as well. I can even exclude child OUs if you have a child OU setup that you want to exclude. All right, so I have close to 121 users right here in my Active Directory infrastructure, and I have the full name of users. And I'd like to add few more attributes to this list. I'd like to know about the password status of these users. I want to know if their password has expired. I want to know if their account has expired. I want to know what's their employee ID and who is their manager and all that stuff. So where do I go to add more LDAP attributes to the list? Very simple. You have the information right here. Okay, so you go to add or remove columns and add any LDAP attribute that you want. For instance, I want to know the account expiry time, whether this account is set to expire next year. I want to know the current account status, whether it's enabled or disabled. I want to know when the account's password is going to expire, right? And home directory, home phone, initials, and are there any logon restrictions for this specific user account? And the manager attribute, I want to know who's the manager of this specific user. And very important, SID. I'll tell you why SID is very important in a short while. All right. And what is when was the password last set? And if the password last set is more than 120 days, then there's something wrong. So I need to have a look at that as well. So I add password last set, right? And when was the object changed? So on and so forth. So I have a lot of attributes that I can add. I can even add custom attributes to the list. I hit OK, and there you go. You have the list right here. Now, I was talking about SID, Security Identifier, and I also told you that I'll be telling you the importance of Security Identifier. Let's say you, for security reasons, have renamed the default administrator account in your Active Directory infrastructure. I have renamed it to James Bond, and I'm quickly going to look for James Bond. All right, so I have James Bond, I have James Bolden, I have James Bond. So I have two James Bonds, and I have one among these two James Bonds are going to be the default administrator account in Active Directory, and I have renamed the default administrator to James Bond for security reasons. Let's say this is what we call as honeypot. So what you do is you rename the default administrator to something else, and whenever you sense someone is trying to log in with the administrator account, which is not the administrator actually, something is wrong and someone is trying to trying a security attack in your organization, and maybe a brute force attack. So it's very important to rename the administrator account. But among these two James Bonds, how do you know which is going to be the default administrator account? That's when something called SID comes into picture. So if you have a look at the last 3 digits of the security identifier, so this one ends in 500, and whereas the last 4 digits of this specific account ends in 1517. So if the last 3 digits of the SID is going to end in 500, now this means this specific account is the default administrator account in Active Directory, and I have renamed this account to James Bond. So you have unique SIDs for few other crucial Active Directory accounts. So you can have a look at the TechNet document in order to get a list of all that. So you can very well add the SID attribute or SID to this specific report, and then have a look at your renamed accounts, maybe a guest account or anything of that sort. All right. So retrieving information about users and also exporting this to any different format that you want. You can also schedule this if you have no time to manually generate the reports that you want. And when you see that something is wrong, let's say that I see something very alarming right here. So the day since password last set is going to be 1210 for this specific account, and you'd like to force this account to change password at next log on. How would you do that? As I said, this is just not about reporting. This reporting functionality will also allow you to manage users. You select, you go to more actions, and you then force the users to change password at next logon from one of these options in the drop-down. All right. So this is another useful tip that could save a lot of your time if you're trying to query information about your users from Active Directory. And a very important point from a security, security standpoint. As administrators, it is very important that you always keep track of accounts that have never logged into your Active Directory infrastructure. All right, so I'm going to quickly ask AD Manager Plus for some help in order to get me the list of the users who have not logged into my Active Directory infrastructure even once. So I go to users never logged on because that's the query that I'm going to generate. Users never logged on. I hit generate. It's going to query all my domain controllers for consistency. And then I have 90 users that have not logged into my Active Directory infrastructure even once. And I have the list of all their names right here. Now, just the names of these accounts or the accounts that have not logged in isn't going to give me the clarity that I expected. I need few more attributes here to actually help me better understand the nature of these users, right? So I'm going to add a few LDAP attributes to this list. So I go to add or remove columns. Now, any user who has not logged into your Active Directory infrastructure even once will have the last logon time set to 0. So I need to confirm that. So I add that attribute to the report. And the second attribute that I would be interested is, now the user has not logged in even once, but is the account still in an enable state? I would like to know the account status as well. So I add that. Now, after adding the account status, I need to know when was the account created, right? Because if I'm trying to disable few users who have not logged in, now I need to know when the account was created. There's no point in disabling an account that was created this morning, right? So whereas it makes sense to disable an account that has not logged in but was created 2 months ago, right? So I'm trying to check the when created timestamp. So I hit OK. Now, why is this important? Why should you even be querying these accounts? Because if you have users who have not logged into your Active Directory infrastructure, let's say you have 20 users. Among those 20 users, let's say 60% of them or 70% of them could be vulnerable to security attacks. And let me tell you, how would you decide that? So for instance, the when created timestamp is very crucial in order to determine the level of vulnerability of that specific account. If you have a look at this specific account here, okay, so I have an account that is named as _finance. The last logon timestamp is 0, and the account is still in an enable state in Active Directory. Why is that? Because the admin might have overlooked this situation. Okay, but when was the account created? This was created in 2015, and the account is still in an enable state in Active Directory, and no one has done anything about this specific account, right? Whereas if this account was created today morning and I see it enabled, it's not big of a problem for me. But this has been in Active Directory for close to 2 years now and in an enable state. Now, one common condition for all these accounts is, if you're creating 5 user accounts today morning in Active Directory, all those 5 user accounts will have the same password in most of the case. And among those 5 user accounts, one account can be an admin account. So if I'm an attacker and if I get hold of this account, and if I'm able to crack the password, the standard password that administrators use, the common password that administrators use for this specific account, and this is a basic account, so through trial and error, I would then crack the password of an admin account that was created today and has not logged into my Active Directory infrastructure. So it's very important that you have a look at the when created timestamp as well. when it comes to users who have never logged on. And you can very well select those user accounts and probably disable them or move all those user accounts to another OU so that you can track the activity of these accounts. So for instance, okay, now this account was created in 2015 and has not logged in even once. Now if I decide to track the activity of these accounts and all of a sudden I sense a VPN login activity from this account, this means that someone is trying to get into my organization, right? That could be a security breach. So this condition is going to be very important when it comes to security, finding out users who have never logged on. All right. The second step or the second aspect when it comes to management is effectual management of objects. And as I said, when I say managing objects, I'm referring to managing the life cycle of objects: creation, modification, and deletion. And there are two ways of doing it. You can manage the life cycle of an object manually or in an automated fashion. Now, when it comes to managing the life cycle, I would like to stick to the classic example of user creation. Let's say you're trying to create a user account in Active Directory. We have already discussed the challenges that we have with the native tool, so I'm going to skip that. I'm not going to repeat it once again. So I'm going to quickly show you the AD Manager Plus way of provisioning user accounts in Active Directory, the manual way, and how you can automate the process. Now, when it comes to user provisioning, we give you a all-in-one layout. Now, when I say all-in-one, I am referring to the attributes in Active Directory. So you have these many attributes in Active Directory. So you have people with Exchange mailboxes, people with Skype for business accounts, Office 365 accounts, and you have home folders, profile paths, and whatnot, right? And moreover, you want the users to be created in a specific format. You want their email address, their logon name to be in a specific format. And if there are any duplicates when you're trying to create accounts in bulk, the application or the tool that you're going to use should have the smartness to deal with duplicates as well. Now, all this is incorporated in this simple layout, which is the user creation templates. And this layout also gives you the power to define your own logic when it comes to user creation. So when you have a template set up, let's say you create a template for one for your marketing department and the other one for your sales department. So every time you have a user recruited for those roles, you load the template, type in the first name and the last name of the user account, hit create, the account gets created with all the attribute that you want. And that includes the other platforms, technology platforms that I just mentioned, like Office 365, Skype for Business, Google Apps, and all that stuff. Now, if you plan to automate the process of user creation, the application also allows you to do that, right? So you have an option to automate the process of user creation. You just tell the application what to do. In my case, I want this application to create user accounts in Active Directory, and I've already created a specific template. So I just map the template here. And all I need to do is just create an Excel sheet and then save that Excel sheet in one of my shared folders, and the application would go to the shared folder, read the information, in the sense read the first name and the last name of the user account from that Excel sheet, apply the template, and create user accounts in Active Directory. Now, wait a minute. I'm not going to create a CSV file. I'm not going to save that CSV file in a shared folder. I don't want the application to read information from a CSV file because there are possibilities of human errors, right? So I would like to computerize the process. Instead of me saving an Excel sheet in a shared path, is there an alternative? I already have an ITSM tool in place. Can this application integrate with the ITSM tool and then create user accounts in Active Directory? Yes, this can very well integrate with the ITSM tool that you have in place. Let's say you have a tool like um, a ServiceNow or Service Desk Plus, and whenever a new user account, a new employee is recruited, you want to create an Active Directory account for that user. So you raise a ticket from your ITSM tool. That ticket integrates with AD Manager Plus, and the accounts are created in Active Directory. So this tool or this platform is going to give you multiple options when it comes to automating your regular things in Active Directory. Third part is delegating. So delegating and auditing actions in Active Directory. Now, I want you to keep in mind some of the important points when it comes to delegating actions in Active Directory. And those points are listed here. Whenever you're delegating stuff in Active Directory, please make sure that you have precise restrictions. So what do I mean by precise restrictions is, I'm referring to organizational unit-based restriction. I'm referring to group-based restriction. I'm referring to attribute-based restrictions, right? So you don't want your helpless technician to be resetting the password of domain admins, or for that matter, your CEO, right? So imposing the right restrictions without affecting the productivity of the user or the technician is very crucial when it comes to delegating actions. The second point that I want you to keep in mind is use the domain admin account only for actions that require the privilege of this account. So for resetting password for other users in Active Directory, it's not a mandate that you need to have domain admin rights, right? So you need to decide the right level of privileges that you are going to assign to that user. Too many admins becomes a very hectic task for, from a security auditing standpoint. So it's always better to keep the domain admins number to a bare minimum. Never use shared accounts. Again, it becomes a bit of a hectic task when it comes to finding out who performed a specific action, right? So never use shared accounts. And when it comes to delegation, you should also have a mechanism to review the actions performed by your technicians. Be it a successful event or a failure event, someone tried to delete a confidential folder, or someone tried to delete the administrator group. So you should have the capability to review events and take corrective actions. So these are some crucial points that I want you to keep in mind whenever you're trying to delegate actions. And if you are trying to do this using group-based restrictions, or if you're trying to do this using the delegation of control wizard that Microsoft has in place for over 16 years, then it's going to be a complex task again. With all these group membership, nested group memberships in place, you'll have to make sure that you delegate them very precisely. So a better alternative again is something called task controllers that we have in this application called AD Manager Plus. So you have a task controller here. You basically decide the exact actions that you are going to delegate, and that also means attributes that you're going to delegate. If you don't want the HR to be filling the group attribute while they create an Active Directory account, you can even restrict that attribute for your HR, right? So this is just for an example. And you want your managers to be generating some of the crucial reports in Active Directory but perform nothing else, you can very well create a task controller based on that. So you want the super admins to have complete access over the portal so that they manage Active Directory. You can very well grant them that right as well. It's just a matter of selecting the right checkboxes. Now, the advantage of going with the task controllers is you have a centralized view of the tasks that you have delegated and its impact, right? Not only that, so this application also gives you an option to track the success and the failure events as well performed by your technicians, be it the administrator, be it the HR, be it your helpless technicians. You can track every activity done by those users, and you need not log into this tool and then generate the report. So you can even schedule this report so that the application sends it to your inbox, right? So any configuration change will also be included in this auditing. Now, some of you might not be comfortable in delegating actions to other users in your organization. I have personally worked with administrators who do not like to delegate actions to other users, right? Instead, they want other users to raise a request to them so that they review the request and then approve it. The application also gives you a request and approve methodology. So let's say a new user is recruited. The HR raises a request, and the request is reviewed by the line manager, let's say, and the line manager adds few other attributes like Exchange mailboxes, Office 365 settings, and then sends it to the executor. The executor then decides the right group membership for that specific user account. And then when the executor says OK, the action takes effect in Active Directory. If you think that these many levels are not required for your organization because your organization has just 100 employees, you'd like to keep it simple, you can have a requester and an executor. So this request and approve methodology is customizable depending on the size of your organization. All right, so we not only give you options to delegate, but also an option to implement a request and approve methodology instead of elevating permissions of users. The last part is going to be something related to Active Directory cleanup. Now, when I say Active Directory cleanup, I'm referring to users who have not logged into Active Directory infrastructure for more than 180 days. There's a difference between inactive users and never logged on users, right? So inactive users, I log into Active Directory today and I resign my job, but my account is still there in Active Directory, and those accounts are considered to be stale accounts. So how does this application help you automatically deal with those stale accounts is what I'm going to be discussing about in the next few minutes, right? So finding out users who have not logged in for 180 days, and that is very important from a security perspective. I mean, finding out such accounts and then managing them based on a security principle. And also, finding out all those accounts can also help you in the effective utilization of licenses. Let's say you have an application in your organization that is licensed based on the number of users. If you have purchased the license for 1,000 users and only 900 of those 1,000 users are active and the remaining 100 are inactive, why pay for the inactive users? So it's very crucial from a license management standpoint that you find the active and the inactive users. And you can maybe remove the licenses from those inactive users and apply it for the active users. And the same holds good for computers as well. Computers that are there in your organization but have not authenticated against your DCs for more than 6 months or a year, that needs to be, not completely removed from Active Directory, at least quarantined. They need to be separated from the other objects in Active Directory, and then they need to be audited, right? And then you have groups without any members. So if you are an administrator of an organization that has tons and tons of groups, some of those groups can be empty. And if those groups are going to be any top level security groups and are in turn linked to some of the very basic groups in your Active Directory infrastructure, through nested group membership, the basic groups gain elevated access. So it's very important for an administrator to perform a cleanup, keeping all these aspects in mind. That's where the tool allows you to create your own security principle or logic for automating the process of Active Directory cleanup. I have created one such policy here. Now, once in every 60 days, I want this application to get the list of inactive users for 180 days, for the last 180 days, and I want the application to move all those inactive users to a separate OU. From a security standpoint, I want these inactive users to be separated from the active ones. And I have an auditing solution in place that's going to audit this specific organizational unit. So if I sense any suspicious logon activity from this specific OU, I can very well take corrective measures, right? So I move them to a different OU. And if I have 50 inactive users, 2 users or 3 users among those 50 users can be administrators. So I remove them from all top level security groups in my domain. This includes the custom made security groups as well. And then immediately I disable those accounts. I don't want the inactive users to be in an enable state. And after 60 days or 120 days or any frequency that you want, I delete the accounts from Active Directory. So when I say delete, it's going to be a complete delete, not only the Active Directory account, but also the mailbox, the Office 365 account, and all other related attributes, complete wipeout. So I can very well define my own logic depending on the functioning of my organization and implement an Active Directory cleanup. Now, when it comes to automating the process of Active Directory cleanup, which involves disabling and deleting actions, some administrators might not be comfortable in automating these crucial actions. That's when you can very well link. I already discussed with you about the request and approve methodology. So you can apply the same methodology for an automation. So whenever the automation process is going to delete users or disable users, this tool is going to, it's not going to delete user accounts in Active Directory directly. Instead, this tool is going to raise a request to the administrator for user deletion or for disabling users. That way, the administrator can have a look at the request and approve or reject the request based on the nature of the request. All right. So with that said, we discussed about the 4 crucial aspects of Active Directory management. So I see that we have already received some questions, so I'm not going to take much of your time. I'm just going to quickly pick up 5 questions from these. I think we have close to 33 or 34 questions, and I will do my best to get back to you with the answers for all those questions. I'll make sure that all of your questions are answered immediately. But for now, I'm just going to quickly pick 5 questions among those 30 odd questions, and let's get started here. So, okay, the first question that I have is, okay, does this tool integrate with ITSM tools? Yes, it does. So it can work as a standalone application or integrate with your ITSM solutions as well. So if you have a ticketing solution in place and you want that to be integrated with this application, yes, we can do that. Okay, the second question is there a notification option for user deletion or whenever a user is disabled? Okay, let me quickly go to the application and show you something very interesting here. So if you go to the admin tab of the application, you have something called notification profile, right? So this notification profile, if you just create a new profile, you can set notification based on an action or a specific domain in case you're managing multiple domains, or based on a technician, right? So let's stick with action here. If the action is, so you can very well create a notification profile for any of these actions. So whenever an account is disabled or deleted, or whenever something happens in Active Directory, you get notified. You can also target a specific technician. Whenever this technician tries to delete any stuff in Active Directory, notify me. And what are the notification options? So you can get an email or an SMS for any such deletion or disabling actions, right? All right, the next question is going to be, does this application support PowerShell scripting? I'm not quite sure what is the exact sense of this, what is the exact context of this question, but yes, this application supports PowerShell scripts. For instance, okay, so let's say you're trying to create a user account in Active Directory, and there are a few other things that you'd like to accomplish apart from the stuff that you see on this specific layout. So we give you an option to execute a custom script and invoke a custom script. So you want the account to be created in Active Directory, and at the same time you want that to trigger another ticket, maybe for resource allocation. You can very well write a custom script here and invoke the custom script. So yes, the application does support PowerShell scripting if that is what you're looking for. And what are the Office 365 capabilities? Okay, now this application can help you create an Active Directory account and at the same time create an account in Office 365 with the exact Office 365 license that you want. That's the best part here. It's just not about creating an Active Directory account and waiting for DirSync. So you can very well map the license and then complete the process of user account provisioning. And apart from that, you can assign or remove licenses, or let's say if you already have an Active Directory account and you'd like to create an Office 365 account for those users, you can even do that. So you can do it simultaneously, or you can maybe create an account in AD and after 5 or 10 days create an O365 account. So and then you also have reports with regards to Office 365. So you have a couple of reports for Office 365 licensing details. Inactive users. If you'd like to know whether there are any inactive users in Office 365 so that you can remove the licenses from those inactive users, yes. And you also have never logged on users, some of the very crucial reports that you want. So yes, the last question that I'm going to take during this session is going to be related to delegation. Can the UI, I think that means user interface, can the user interface be customized and delegated to the HR? Okay, so the question is, I don't want the HR, I don't want the help desk technician to be having access to all this. I just want them to be able to access just a specific report, or I want them to just reset password or unlock accounts and see nothing else. I don't want them to be viewing the admin groups or resetting password for administrators. All that can be achieved using this application. So this is what we call as task controllers or help desk roles. So this can help you achieve your requirement. So you can restrict the level of access and the options that a specific user sees when they log into this specific application. All right, so I hope I have answered all those 5 questions that I've taken, and I see that I still have 29 questions to be answered. I'll definitely get back to you with the answers, and if you have more questions, please shoot an email to this address. It is going to be vivin.satyan@zohocorp.com, and we'd be more than happy to answer your questions. So thank you very much for joining this session. I hope you found this session a bit informative. Please spend a few seconds of your time to let us know your feedback. A survey would be sent to you, and we'd be more than happy to work on your feedback. Thank you very much. You all have a nice day. Bye-bye.